it's a great pleasure indeed to welcome you to the third of the InfraKatha series, Conversations That Connect, which is a wonderful novel idea that we had from the InfraVision Foundation. Rumjum is here, Rumjum Chatterjee. Vinayak I don't see. Maybe he's busy traveling. And Kaveri is here from the InfraVision Foundation. They had this wonderful idea of conversations around infrastructure, which completely connect with our theme in India Habitat Center, which is to do with the built environment and habitats for all creatures that dwell on this planet. So, and this one is particularly interesting, the third, because it features two friends whom I've known for decades, both of them. So one is, of course, the person I've known longest is actually Dilip Cherian, because he was around as a slightly senior person during my university days. And the one I've known a little less, but also for decades, since the 90s, since he shifted back to India, is Mr. Gurucharan Das, because once he shifted back to India, I happened to be the first person to direct a production of one of his 3 plays, which was 9 Jaku Hill. So that we worked very closely together on that first production. So it's a great pleasure indeed to introduce this wonderful conversation, which the title of which is sort of based on one of Gurucharan's books, the one on Dharma, I think, which was called The Difficulty of Being Good. Gurucharan has written these books on all the 4 qualities, according to our traditions. I don't think I want to steal the joke that Dilip just made to me. He said, this talk is wrongly titled. It should have actually been titled The Ease of Being Bad. So on that note, I leave it to the two of them, and I hope we'll have a really interesting conversation between Gurucharan Das and Dilip Cherian.
Thank you. Thank you, Sunit. And I think people missed your double entendre of the katha and the tale. So I know that none of it is ever non-prepared. So it's wonderful. With that introduction, everybody knows Mr. Das as an author, but I've known him also as a corporate manager, a person who has had to deal with the minutiae of balance sheets, of having to worry about returns on capital and things like that. And I love the segue that he's made into the purely intellectual life, which is fantastic. And I'm going to try and keep this talk as a conversation so that you have the ability to go where you want, and I have the ability to hopefully be on the side of the audience and make sure that they get what they're here to hear. I'm going to be aided and abetted in this by nods and comments from the floor as we go along, and we'll keep it fluid and flexible. Is that all right? In terms of working rules? Kaveri, since you're the boss? All right, okay. So, because the subject is infrastructure and the foundation which has put this together, which I also play a small role in, we are constantly looking, Gurucharan, at this whole issue of how does a nation which is at this stage of our development look at our future, and what role does infrastructure play in a sense, ensuring a level of equity, which is, I remember from bits of the book that I've read, is also a prime requirement for expecting a certain level of social good. So I'm going to start by asking you that as in terms of how you see that as an important.
So before I answer this question, a couple of quick points. One is, I think, well, you made the point that, he's well known. And the last time somebody, a few months ago, introduced me, oh, Gurucharan Das, he's too well known. You know what he said after that? The less said about him, the better. So at least you didn't say that. The second point I wanted to make was that Sunit Tandon was very modest. He directed the Yatrik's most famous production, which had 65 shows, including one here, including the ones in Stein Theatre here at Habitat.
At which time he was not associated with Habitat.
He was not associated. Maybe that's why it had 65 production, I don't know. But it really, but the commercial part of the message is there's a production tomorrow at 6:30 at IIC of 9 Jakhu Hill, which I wrote in my difficult days, and in my 20s, frankly, and it's done in English. So you will find this a novel experience.
And I've even brought someone down from Jakhu Hill just for that.
Okay.
Devi has come from Jakhu.
Okay. So, now to come back, now to get to the subject. So, yes, I think, look, we all know that this government has done a pretty impressive job with infrastructure. There's physical infrastructure, there's social infrastructure also, there's infrastructure in education, health, which we don't really associate with physical infrastructure generally. But the fact is that since 2011, road mileage in this country has doubled. The fact is that also the port handling capacity has quadrupled. With GST, we are one market, and for a person like me who is still on the boards of companies like Procter & Gamble and Gillette and so on, I can say there's been a substantial savings in the private sector. Because we don't have to have a depot in every state, and we have to worry about sales tax inspectors in every state, it's all really a much smoother ride. So plus the digital revolution, etc. So the country is now really on a stage at a cusp of a certain kind of takeoff, but it's not inevitable. And the story of our country really begins in 1991, frankly, the story of the economy. That's when we got our freedom, economic freedom. For the first 40 years, we had, after independence, we had great political freedom, religious freedom, freedom of association, freedom of speech, all kinds of freedoms that are in our Constitution. But frankly, we were denied economic freedom. And so we actually lost 2 generations of our country's young people in the opportunities that could have been created for them. And all this was done in the name of the poor, but the number of poor doubled between 1950 and 1990. So that's an old story. Let's begin from 1991 is really when the story begins. And since then, from 1991 to now, maybe a little more than 30 years, India has grown at 6% a year. 6% a year, and in real terms, which is quite amazing for a democracy. And it has lifted 450 million people out of poverty. Extreme poverty, which is defined by the World Bank's line metric as $2.15 a day, that is almost vanishing. Less than 5%. Some people say less than 2% are in that slot. The middle class has grown from 10% to 30%. So I think we can feel pretty good that over these 30 odd years, we have been the second fastest growing economy, and today we are the fastest growing economy. But there's a problem. And the problem is that in these 30 years, the economy has been firing on 2 out of 3 engines only. The third engine has really let us down, which was the most important one. We have to applaud this work done by services, especially the IT services, that they have put India on the map, and they will continue to do so. So that is good. Agriculture has played its part. From a deficit country, we have become a surplus country. We're the 4th largest exporter of food in the world. But manufacturing has let us down. Manufacturing today is between 13 to 15% of GDP, which is pathetic. It should be double. It should be in the 30s. And we can, and that for all countries that went, this is historically in the West, in the East, all countries that rose from being poor to middle class societies, they went through an industrial revolution. We have not achieved that industrial revolution. Now, it's not for lack of trying. It's the difficulty of being good. All the governments tried to do what they thought was good, including this one, but there were failings. The chief failings was the overhang of the license Raj, meaning the first 40 years, we had a law which called the SSI, Small Scale Industries Reservation, that came about. Actually, it was started during Indira Gandhi's time, but it was really enacted during the Janta government, in the belief, honest to God belief, that small is good, that big companies are bad. And so, in that, almost 800 industries, 780 something like industries were, large industries were banned from these 780 sectors. And this law, therefore, prevented the big companies to get into this area of labor-intensive manufacturing. And it was ironical, because they were prevented, it just acquired a bad name. And really the law finally went away in 2016, but substantially in 2005.
You know, I'm going to bring you back to the subject of infrastructure, because that's what our focus is.
I know.
Does infrastructure allow you to do manufacturing more efficiently, and therefore, is there a chance that the goodness...
Can we do it now? I was just coming to that. Okay. So I'm glad you prompted me. I was just going back into the past just to give you the main reasons why we failed, why we were difficult to be good. And so there were laws like this. The second part was that we did not do, when we did the opening in 1991, we did not do 2 things. One is we did not reform the bureaucracy. We did not change the attitudes of the bureaucracy. The best example of this was the bureaucracy of the Great Britain, of United Kingdom. We inherited that bureaucracy, but today it's a completely different bureaucracy from the one that is ours. And the credit of that partly goes to Margaret Thatcher. And she made another point, Margaret Thatcher. She said that, bear with me a second, I'm coming to the subject. She used to say that I spend 20% of the time reforming and 80% of the time selling the reforms. Now, the other great, she's not very popular now. But the other guy, great guy who sold the reforms and the market was Deng Xiaoping in China. He didn't have to do it. He was the great leader of his time. So it wasn't even a democracy, but he used to sell it. So my point is, the attitudes of the Indian public are still that the reforms and the market makes the rich richer, the poor poorer. It is that they cannot distinguish between being pro-market and pro-business. And this, no prime minister, I would say, not Narasimha Rao, not Manmohan Singh, not Vajpayee, not Modi. Nobody has done this job of actually doing it. So people, the political class believes that it's a losing, vote-losing proposition. Anyway, now to come back to now.
Sure.
So here we are today with terrific infrastructure, really much better than the past. And you'd say that we are now ready to have the Industrial Revolution. And whatever one's opinion about Mr. Modi may be, well, I disagree with him on many things. But one thing about him is that he is a doer. He gets things done. And the best example of this is direct benefit transfers. I think his popularity today is in the rural areas, but especially, but otherwise also, is because for the first time, the benefits to the people, and they have been delivered. They've been delivered, and actually some very large numbers have been saved in the government treasury as a result of the delivery. And whether it's whatever program you talk about, Manrega payments or food delivery of food, free food, etc., etc. I won't labor that. So what is needed? What is needed now is a very heavy lifting, and that is not Mr. Modi's strong suit. It is to do the reforms. And the reforms are partly the reforms he could not do in the first 10 years. These were the land acquisition. It's still a problem. The labor laws, even bigger problems. Now what they've done is, with labor laws, they were about 40 to 50 different labor laws, and they have actually sensibly put them into 4 labor codes. But they have not been passed by the parliament, and partly because of opposition. And to win over the opposition now is going to be even more difficult. It's a much more energized opposition. He's also got allies now to think about to bring them in. Certainly, Chandrababu Naidu will be an easy win because he believes he's probably the best reformer that we have in the country.
And a believer in infrastructure, actually.
And a believer in infrastructure. I'm glad that's what we are supposed to be talking about.
The infrastructure question, I'm still going to, not just because I have to make sure that the InfraVision Foundation gets its bang for the buck, but also because when you build infrastructure at this scale, this is something that you've, in a sense, dealt with in your book. There's bound to be something that is quite distasteful to many people when they build infrastructure, is there's bound to be failure. There's bound to be bankruptcy. And any large infrastructure creating government has to deal with more than bridges that fall. It has to deal with the fact that some of these road makers, some of these airport builders are going to just fall apart not because there's no demand, but because they've financially structured it and therefore done it wrong or borrowed money at the wrong rate, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And being good requires the ability to deal with failure. So it can't all be just roses and growth and big ticket. So how do you, in a sense, how do you crack that problem?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Dilip, because really one of the things that has dogged our country for the last 15 years is ever since the 2008 financial crisis, global financial crisis, the problem, the chief economic advisor, Subramaniam, used to call it twin balance sheet problem. It was a problem, and a lot of the companies were infrastructure companies, but there were others. There were steel companies, there were other companies.
But a lot of them were infrastructure companies.
Yeah, and the problem was that they were overextended, they went into debt, and there were many reasons, some environmental that stopped them. But this problem actually escalated and kept growing on. And the last 10 years really have been a dogged fight to solve this problem. And the talk about the difficulty of being good, the solution to this problem has not been to say, you owe money to the bank, now pay your money. The guy says, well, I don't have the money. I've spent it. And the road is half built. Or the steel plant is half built. So, what happened after the 2008 crisis was that not only India, but other governments as well, they loosened the tap. They allowed loans to be given much more freely to the private sector. So banks were given the instruction to give loans freely. So a lot of them, also there were bad loans. Anyway, this question has been a very serious overhang on the country, but it got solved. That's the great news. And how did it get solved? It got solved in a very odd way. We have a new law, which is the bankruptcy law, the IBC. And before this, you couldn't close a company. It was very, very difficult. But with this law, there were people in the government who analyzed the problem, and they discovered that out of the thousands and thousands of crores that were owed to the bank, actually the number of people who were owed the money, it's that old 80-20 rule that about 30 companies accounted for 80% of the problem.
Yes.
And so, of these 30 companies, most of them were in one sector. And so one fine day, a young man in the government, I shall not mention him because he might feel embarrassed, but this young man who came from the private sector, was a banker actually, he told his boss that, look, why don't we just take this one sector, 5 companies, and why don't we declare them bankrupt? It took some, because these were big companies, and they were not infrastructure, by the way.
I know.
These 5 companies, finally, they got agreement of the government at the top, declare them bankrupt. They couldn't believe it. Suddenly, of the 30 companies that were the problem, 20 paid money back. They got so scared. The 20 found ways, selling jewelry of the family or whatever it took, but they paid the money back. And this is how the ball escalated, because the fear was, until now, you could get away. And so, the idea of the difficulty of being good is that it's not necessarily to behave with dharma, with being good, or doing what you're supposed to do, paid money. You need some incentive. And in this case, what happened really was that the IBC, the new law, actually came more as a frightening possibility that I'm going to lose my company.
So, in a sense, therefore, you're holding out hope that companies who are investing heavily in the infrastructure sector have the ability to get out and close shop because of IBC.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, given the scale at which we are depending on infrastructure and continued building of infrastructure to roll out the other great necessity of any society being good is the creation of jobs. Yeah. So if you look at it from the point of view of closure and collapse, all of that, how does any government incentivize the sustained growth of infrastructure as part of the basis of creating jobs, especially for underskilled people?
Yeah, so that's really the issue. The issue, you've hit the nail on the head. The reality today is 45% of Indian people, workers, are today 45% are in agriculture. Agriculture needs only half as many people, and it would actually become even more productive with less people. And so, how do we create the kind of jobs that we could, and the skills that these people need to take them thing. Now, I think as far as we are next year, budget is very soon, 23rd is the budget. And I don't think we should look to the budget to solve this problem, first of all. Secondly, I do think that the government has done a good job in creating infrastructure, but that has not, it's supposed to crowd in, public investment is supposed to crowd in private investment. Now, in this case, it has not done. It's usually 1-to-1. 1 rupee spent by the government should result in a 1 rupee spent by the private sector. And so, some people fear that the government might actually turn populist, having actually done not so well in this last election. They will start the process of what the opposition has been doing, giving rowdies freebies. I don't think that's going to be. I don't think the government is going to do that. I think the capex or the capital spending on infrastructure will continue, maybe not at that same level, but I think will continue. And it's probably a right thing to do. Now the question is, that you ask is, how do we connect this
to jobs?
To jobs. So we have to first see that we have to first now pay attention to the fact that, yes, the reality is today, why don't we have, first of all, the problem today is that consumption is weak, which is the reason, which is the excuse that the private sector companies give for not investing. They said, look, if there's no demand, Why should I expand my factory? Its capacity of my factory is only running 60% or 65%. So you have to then think, some people are saying give money to the people, so they will spend money, and then the companies will invest. Again, a bad idea. So it's really the hard job of linking public investment to private investment and really going after areas that create jobs. Now, the government has tried, it's aware of this problem. They have tried through this industrial policy, PLI.
PLI scheme, yeah.
PLI scheme. Now, PLI scheme, they've done a few good things, I must say, but if I were in their place, I would target the reward of PLI, the subsidy, not to production, but to exports. I would target it to labor-intensive sectors. The PLI should be labor-intensive sectors. And there are those, by the way, despite what they may say about robotics and all. And third, I would put a sunset clause in every PLI contract that the tariff in that industry is going to come down to global competitive levels by this date. So, in other words, what prevents, you see, we think we have a big domestic market. We don't. No country, even China, realized it doesn't have a big. China's market was 4 times bigger than India, but it also realized it had to export. So the mantra has to be export of labor-intensive manufacturers, and India's share is less than 2% of global exports of manufactured goods. That is a simple, and if you look at Japan, Korea, Taiwan, all the Asian tigers, and now China, and now Vietnam coming up, all these countries have risen from poverty to prosperity, from poverty to middle class, from poor to being middle class, through this mantra of exporting labor-intensive manufacturers.
You know, I'm going to switch from the past and the current to, I'm segueing into the future. And here I'm going to test territories in which your notion of old-fashioned Mahabharat style dharma may be tested. And I'm giving you a proposition here. Imagine a world a few years from now where, despite your dismissal of robotics, a large part of manufacturing is done by machines. A large part is done by not only CAD/CAM but also,
3D printing.
3D printing.
Yeah.
It's controlled, monitored, God forbid, by Microsoft, which is having a blooper moment at the moment, but by gigantic companies who decide how much is to be made where, at what time. Okay, so then most of the human population then gets left behind with doing nothing and accepting a dole. We don't know how government will decide that. Then what residual value is there in all this talk we have of what people should do, where the focus should be? Because as soon as computers are able to achieve a generalized intelligence phase, then all these decisions may also be taken by algorithms which are no longer decided by us. So what then? I'm asking the Gurucharan Das mind to analyze what happens, what is the consequence of that. Infrastructure is decided by it. Maybe most of us will be required to stay at home if traffic is too much or if traffic is a problem.
Or if there's no traffic at all.
Or there's no traffic at all.
Well, you've laid out a plausible
Dystopian,
scenario
yes,
in the future. And I've looked into this now. I was very worried myself about this, but I've looked into it, and what I've discovered is that the first industries that are going to really be affected by AI and technology are actually going to be the white collar industries. So it's the legal profession, the accounting profession, the IT, all the IT areas.
Most of media has been replaced by bots.
Media and so on. So that is going to be the first to get affected. But yes, I think eventually, we don't know. I mean, Adidas was one company, the people who make athletic wear and shoes and things. They created a factory in Germany, believing that it would be a pure robot-run factory. Given the high wages in Germany, it made sense to try it out. It did not take off. They still needed a lot of workers. So, I mean, that's just one extreme example. But the sense that I have got in reading about this whole area and talking to people in the consumer, these are often consumer products that we're talking about, garments, shoes, toys, food processing, things that farmers' kids could also do easily.
Cars?
Cars is maybe a little bit easier perhaps now. But there's a lot of stuff which is, even electronic products require a fair amount of assembly line type of work. And the long and short of it is we have at least a dozen, maybe 15 years that we'll be all right. Beyond that, one can't look. And, I'm glad that Mr. Modi has this goal of 2047 that he has given to the country. It's nice to have a goal. It's a difficult goal to achieve, but it's not implausible. You can at least get near it, and to raise your per capita income from today close to $3,000 per capita to 10,000 plus, 11,000, some to 12,000. Maybe we won't get to that 13,000 bit, but I think it's plausible. What I'm trying to say is, to achieve that goal, you have to do the industrial part. You can't just run on two engines without the third engine. So I think we are seized of this, and I would just say that, yes, we have, just as we have demographics, we have about 20 years now in demographic terms before our population also begins to age like China. But 20 years, if you have today, given all the advantages the country has, it's the fastest growing economy, it's got, the FDI will come in. Now, how do we go about it? One is, first of all, it's the big companies who are going to break into. The guys we are competing with, whether they're from Bangladesh, Vietnam, or China, or in the West, those companies that own these labor-intensive markets are large companies. So it won't be the small guys. So now large companies, and if it's an Indian company that's going to try to do it, the problem with Indian companies, and I can speak with my multinational experience, having run Procter & Gamble, that the first lesson I learned from Procter & Gamble is that if you to break into a entrenched leader, to defeat the leader in that market, you have to offer, you can't do it in marketing. You have to offer the consumer a tangible benefit. You have to make the shirt cleaner. You have to do something. I mean, that's why I wonder why P&G has 10,000 PhDs working on making shirts cleaner. Because they're obsessed that product superiority is the only way. Now, that's the weak suit of Indian companies. So even if Mr. Modi calls Adani, Ambani, and Tata and everybody to come and say, you do it, I think unless it's not in their bones, this idea that this is how you have to go about it. So I would do one thing. If I were in Mr. Modi's place, I would have a task force. First of all, the whole thing should be on a mission basis. Too many ministries involved in education, in skilling, apprenticeship, ye wo bahut karna hai. So the answer is target about, it's like the way that story that I told you about how they did the bankruptcy code.
Yeah.
Target about a dozen companies in the world and the Indian government has never done things like this. The babus will sit and say, I asked them, how did you get Apple to come to India? And the chief guy says, I gave them permission. That's the attitude of the government bureaucrat. So you've got to get up out of your chair and you've got to work hard to convince the person. Today, a lot of them are in China. They're all nervous. But instead of India, they prefer Vietnam. They prefer Indonesia. They prefer Mexico. They prefer going to Ohio. So there are a lot of options open for them. And I would just go to them, tell them that we will help you out, but come, and this is the reward through exports, through whatever other ways. But that would be that's really, frankly, the only way that I would see. And this is very unconventional. The government of India never behaves like this. The opposition will say, "Soot boot ki sarkar." They will say, "Sell out to the Western capitalist, East India Company." Sab kahenge. Not just the opposition, but RSS and whatever will scream bloody murder. But
and following the 80-20 principle, since we've finished about 80% of the time,
okay.
I'm going to let 20% of the time go
let's
to
open
questions from the audience, because we have an enormously engaged audience. Only 2 people have left while I watched, so which is fantastic as a standard. And I think Suneet is showing some signs of departure. No, he's not. Okay. So questions from the audience, and then we will allow Gurucharan to wrap up. So quick question. Name, question, no comments, just questions.
Yeah, my name's Nilanjan. I have two problems with your view on infrastructure in India. One is quality, because I think the infrastructure that we are rolling out may be a lot in quantity, but it's not good in quality.
I referred to bridges that collapse.
Yeah, bridges, dams. But the primary example is our new Parliament House, which was flooded on its first day. And I think it still has that problem. The second is that this infrastructure which is being rolled out in such huge quantity is leading to global warming.
Okay,
at least
got it.
our country warming. So what do you have to say about that?
yeah.
So the question is essentially poor quality infrastructure and environmental damages because of infrastructure that's thoughtless in some sense.
Yeah. No, so both very good
questions. Yeah.
Questions. And now, the reality is that when I said that the road mileage has doubled, now when you've done all this in the last 15 years, some bridges will collapse, some roofs will fall off, but one has to be practical. It's like in every society, out of 100, you'll have a few crooks. And so you can't make a law which will harass everybody else because they are honest. And I mean, if you will have 2 crooks. And I mean, this is not quite like the reaction of the Americans to Osama bin Laden's attacks at 9/11. The whole country came down. Actually, Osama bin Laden won because the whole country became paranoid. And the way the Bush administration reacted, etc. It gave America a very bad name. Plus, it caused in the process. I mean, you have to now go through the checks, etc. But I'm trying to say that just because a few things go wrong, you should not necessarily harass or.
But what about the environment?
I think that's a very serious question. And yes, I mean, the idea of industrial revolution sends environmentalists, they begin to really fear. But there are ways, it's going to be more difficult, but there are ways to do it sustainably, responsibly. For example, the whole push the country is giving now to renewable energy from the old fossil fuel energy. And luckily it's what we should be doing anyway, because we are losing so much money in our export. I mean, all our export earnings are lost by importing the oil.
Correct.
So it's something we should do for our own selves, and we're making a good. Anyway, the long and short of it is that yes, there's a way to do a green industrial revolution, if you will, green energy, green ways of working.
Got it.
And we should do it responsibly.
Question. Mic here, please.
My name is Suresh Tawani. Yeah, my name is Suresh Tawani, and my question is that since 1991 we embarked on reforms when the economy was small, and now this economy is almost 6 times of that.
Yeah.
Reforms need reforms, because if we have the similar reforms or little modified reforms to grow from $3 trillion to what we are aiming at, $10 trillion, same reforms will not work. So what do you think the government needs to do to accelerate this pace of reforms?
Yeah.
How do we reform the reforms? Good question.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is the weak suit, because the need to, for example, administrative reform. There are a lot of small process. You know, in business you'd be familiar with. Business people call this business process restructuring, business process re-engineering. There's a lot of things, like, actually that's what they had to do. When they did the DBT transfer, they were able to connect the Aadhaar identity with the bank. Bank was on the telephone. The cell phone, the banking people, most people today have never been to a bank branch today who do banking.
Not recommended still, but by the way.
Anyway, so my point is that this was a very good example of business process restructuring. Now, there's potential in many areas. In fact, there's a little group in the government working on it. It's very tough, because they are the most despised people in the government, because they just want to shake things up. But little areas, and which the bureaucracy for 50 years, 100 years have done it this way. They say, why should we do it differently? So that's why I brought Margaret Thatcher's reform of the British bureaucracy, which is unrecognizable today from what it was. And we are still the same bureaucracy. So that is, I guess, one, this re-engineering, it is, the reforms we need are vast. In education, we have to produce employable graduates. We have to link those graduates to industry, where the demand is. Link it to apprenticeship programs. Now, these are not difficult to do, but it requires heavy lifting. And I don't know.
Sure.
It really requires a single-minded focus that this is the single priority of the government for the next 10 years.
Which is what you referred to when you said mission mode is needed in some of these critical things. Question there. Yes, we come to you next.
Thank you so much. Very thoughtful discussion. My question really is about You
Your
said
name, sir, first.
my name is Vinay Kumar,
Thank you.
and is about the attitudinal change that you talked about in the bureaucracy in particular. I mean, I don't know how that's going to come about. I see that I have worked very closely with the government, with the non-profit sector, all over the place. It is that attitudinal thing
Yeah.
which is restricting. And I don't know, for the last 35 years, 40 years, we've been talking about it.
Right.
How's that going to come about?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, Dr. Manmohan Singh tried to do something quite modest. He said that let's look at the appraisal form of the bureaucracy. In other words, it's the how an officer is appraised. And at that time it was very popular, the idea of 360-degree appraisal, etc. And he suggested that why don't we, instead of having a boss and boss's boss, let's do a wider appraisal of the individual. Well, he failed. So that points to how difficult the bureaucracy reform is. But you need that kind of attitude, that sort of strong. And one thing is there, the Prime Minister really does believe in going through the bureaucracy, working through, motivating through the bureaucracy. The only thing, you're absolutely right, is the attitude change. Now, attitude change, I had only one meeting with Mr. Modi, and this was in 2016. So soon before demonetization and soon after he was elected in 2014. So he called 3-4 people who write on the economy. I was writing a column, and you can guess the other 3-4 people also who they were. But each of us, he was very open. He said, tell me what I should be doing. And I said, I gave this example, that you should be selling the market. And he said, why? I said, it's not easy for people to understand that millions of people who work for their own profit, that it eventually leads to the whole society rising. It's hard to understand, even intellectually. Intellectuals find it hard to understand. It's one of the most difficult things to sell. So why don't you use your man ki baat and go after this point? That actually everybody gains when the market works, and you need regulation of the market, you need to have it, you need to competition, etc. So he says, okay, give me a one-pager. That was the word he used, one-pager. And so I gave him a one-pager, and I think he did sort of sell it, not exactly the way I would have put it, but anyway, he did it, but then he forgot about it.
Do we have to blame you for Man Ki Baat starting or no?
You can blame me also, but the reality is that, you have to do it day in and day out. You have to really go and change the attitude. Yeah. And the bureaucracy itself doesn't believe in the market. So you have a job to do.
Yes, coming to you. And you.
Yes, sir.
Good evening, sir. I'm Dr. Amit Garg from the Ministry of Railways.
Yeah.
I would begin by first complimenting you on your two books, which I have read avidly, which is India Unbound and The Difficulty of Being Good. These two are like treatises for me, and I've read them multiple times. And what you have written in The Difficulty of Being Good, which is what is not found here, what is not here is not found anywhere else.
Right.
And I believe this is probably more apt for India Unbound. I believe what is not in India Unbound is probably nowhere else.
Thank you.
It's such a fantastic written book, sir. Please accept my compliments, and I consider this a privilege to be in front of you. That was one part. The second part is, as you rightly said, that manufacturing is a big, a handicap or a setback still in the Indian economy. And but there are a lot of young entrepreneurs who would like to enter into the sector of manufacturing.
but then the fear of failure is one part which stops many youngsters to get into or set their foot into it. Is there any way in which you would suggest that the government can either encourage or ensure the failure which stops many youngsters to get into manufacturing?
Yeah. That's a very good question. And I've also thought about it because frankly, the statistic that you all would be interested in is that there was a study done in America between 1970 and 1990. And this study showed that the major amount, the jobs, 80% of the jobs were created by startups. In other words, industries that did not exist, companies that did not exist. And it was not the big Exxons, and it was not the mom and pop stores. It was these startups which succeeded. DHL, Federal Express, that time, there was the ones that were coming up. So, yes, I think it's the startups. This government is very supportive of the startup. I feel that they should really internalize this lesson. In manufacturing, it's generally the rule. I was pointing out that would be the big companies, because you are up against very, very large competitors in this case. And so, but the way the small companies contribute is through becoming ancillaries of the large companies. Now, in the case of startups, I think this is a very good question. I mean, the government, we should really think about it, that how can you ensure there is fear of failure in everything? And the reason that these guys go for the companies that are IT, I mean digital, almost all our startups are digital, is because it's a simpler route. You don't have to hire a lot of people, etc. So there must be some way that you can sort of make it a little bit easier, a little insurance of some kind for them.
I'm going to take one question there and then close with the question there. Sorry, we're out of time.
So my name is Varun Khurana. My question is, what about education infrastructure? We only talk about primary schools.
Yeah.
What about university education, where India and Indians are spending billions of dollars every year because there's a huge demand-supply mismatch?
Yeah. So that's the problem of creating an employable graduate. That the graduates we are creating. That's what I'm talking about. Graduates, university graduates, white collar. And I think that there are two ways to go about it. One, I think that we should not let up on the effort of creating engineers, etc. But the thing would be to somehow target the areas of high technology, the AI area. Just produce AI engineers for the next 10 years, and you'll conquer the world. Now, that sort of thing, obviously companies are aware of it. The companies can only do so much. This is where IITs, etc., and the regional engineering colleges and make that a mantra. The other part is that really I think that there is an obsession. Everybody wants a white-collar job. And the reality is that the real need is very often for blue-collar, the people who work with their hands. And this is where you have to link with the demand with the thing. So it has to be worked in combination with industry. Government sort of is always shy to talk to industry. We need to know where the demand is. And that's the starting point of these skill missions, etc., that we have. And obviously an apprenticeship program, that's central, that you have. And the company must bear part of the cost. And it's not that the government should only bear the cost, because the best people will be rewarded. The company will be rewarded with that.
Thank you. That'd be the last question.
So my name is Deepak Shetty. I'm CEO and Managing Director at JCB. So we deal a bit into infrastructure sector.
Right.
On a personal note, I read your book around 13, 14 years back, The Subtle Difficulty of Being Good, Subtle Art of Dharma. I want to really thank you for writing that book. I've given that copies of those books to many of my friends outside also, I think.
Thank you.
Amazing, amazing, and you depend. I wanted to share something with you, sir. You are hitting the nail on the head when you are talking about manufacturing. I can tell you that the way the MSME sector has been developed around our infrastructure, our 23 factories in UK, Brazil, or America can come to a grinding stop if the small suppliers in India today don't supply them parts. So it is happening. The second bit I wanted to mention, we are talking about infrastructure. I think one of the biggest burden that the manufacturing sector in India carries is the logistics cost. Today versus the 7-8% that you have in the developed world, we are spending almost 13%. And then the congestion at the ports, etc., which is holding us back. I wanted to ask, my question is, the government is talking about signing up various FTAs, and there are two sides to that. What are your thoughts about FTAs and also this whole WTO? Today it has almost become irrelevant. What are your thoughts about it?
I'll let that pass, though it's strictly not infrastructure like many other questions, but I get your point, FTAs.
Yeah.
And I've been told by the organizers we can take 2 more questions. Okay.
Okay, there's this gentleman also.
Oh,
here.
okay.
Oh, this.
Oh my God. Now we'll do a rapid fire then.
Thank you.
Okay.
Just joking. No, we'll get
Very quickly.
Sir,
very quick questions.
yeah,
very quick answers.
I'm R.N. Jindal and...
No, sorry, can I answer this gentleman quickly? To answer your question on the FTA, I think they're needed now. And the multilaterals, let's not get bogged down with the multilateral thing. Let's make deals with the governments. It'll help us. Actually, it'll bring down our tariffs when we do, the more, the better in this case. Right.
Yeah, thank you. This is R.N. Jindal. And so I have 2 small questions. One is, bankruptcy law is applicable to the big companies, but partnership firms, even guarantors' properties are being auctioned, put on the block, and we see a lot of advertisement in the newspaper. So there is a partiality into this. One. Second is, this infrastructure push in Noida has taken away the hard-earned money of more than 1 lakh people. And the super tech and many infrastructure companies who were building houses. And there's no light in the tunnel. Thank you.
Well, I'm not an expert on the Noida situation. I thought RERA had solved the problem, but at least...
It's only kicked it up.
Yeah, I can tell you one personal example. My wife had put some money in one flat in Greater Noida, I think it was, and it was called Green Bay, I think was the company, whatever. But she went to RERA, she got her money back at least. So she didn't lose any money. So I thought this was a good story. Now, you tell me that it's not getting it.
Found the person is run with 700 crores of rupees, and we found him selling onions in the Nasik.
Okay.
Brought him there and put in the tihar jail. That's all.
Okay. All right. There's another. It's a
question.
complicated. I'm not a good person to ask that question.
Yeah, Ravi Burgess. So I have a question which is linked to Mr. Khurana's and a few others. So India is a land of extremes, and we notice that even development, especially of infrastructure, is unequal. So since there is significant money at the bottom of the pyramid, and tier 2, 3 cities, and even villages, there is a lot of scope. So is a task force centralized approach a better thing, or we should focus on maybe a rural, let's say, localized development where the people say what they want built, so that there is demand from there, and then we can have education, because there a civil engineer would be more likely to work in a rural area if he's getting paid. Yeah. Otherwise, I have, as a counselor, sent a lot of civil engineers who worked in TCS.
Got it.
To Stanford,
Got your
and they are
question.
in Unilever.
Got your question. Now look, this is a nice, idealistic way to think. And I used to think that way too. But let me tell you how the world has developed. I don't think we are going to create a new model. I mean, Gandhi was very, that was his dream. This India's self-sufficient villages, and he was against urbanization. But the reality is that the cost, frankly, if we can fix our cities and fix the tier 2, tier 3 towns and give them governance, better governance, and we will do, and frankly, should be going vertical. We are short of space as a country. In the way we are urbanizing horizontally, we should be horizontally going it vertically. So anyway, this is not the place to solve all our problems. Next. But I would just say that yes, that's an idealistic idea that we should have world-class schools in our villages, world-class hospitals in our villages. ये नहीं होने वाला, पैसे ही नहीं है.
Okay, that question, and then the ladies. There's a question from a lady there after him. Go ahead. Quick question.
I'm Raghvendra. My question is that everything looks very rosy. We are growing, and we are the fastest growing economy. But what about the equity and disparity? Because that is also simultaneously increasing.
What is part?
Equity and disparity. Equity and disparity.
Look, I'll tell you, yes, obviously we all would like to have more equity, equality. I'm a classical liberal, and liberty, equality are very much, all human beings like that. But, at this stage of our development, I don't frankly have any sleepless night about Ambani, Adani, and all these rich guys. And the reason is that I feel we should be measuring opportunity rather than inequality and equality. If in the process, the country, the point is, if at 7-8% growth rate, what we should be doing is creating many more jobs. It's the old question that we've been discussing. The failure is the lack of opportunity. If a young person if the young person can get a job, then he doesn't worry that Ambani is earning so much more. He's concerned about himself, his family, his cousin. If his cousin is doing better than him, he's worried about that. You compare yourself to people who are closer to you, not to those rich guys. Just as the ordinary English person doesn't compare himself to the King of England.
Mr. Das, I agree with you with all the tremendous growth that you've been talking of, and that we've had infrastructure and everything. But don't you think we are very lopsided? We are growing with cutting trees, lacks of trees, environment vitiation, and we are just not looking at the actual quality jobs. We are Jugaad country, we are a country of fix-it. We are not at all looking at the quality of the work. Look at the roads causing accidents. I believe the roads are tarmacked, causing the tires to bubble and the cars to roll off the roads. That's what has been put in the road to make it smooth, but it's not smooth. Right. It's causing a lot of tremendous accidents. I don't know why the government is not looking into all that, and unnecessarily creating so many institutions. Somebody talked of education. Government is not interested in opening education institutions. This privatization. They want lots of private people to put in money, and lots of negative happening as NEET and all. We've seen it happening.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, my dear, I hope you're not talking about the government only the government should create jobs now. Because the government, yes, the communism failed. So we should not, don't say what the government should be doing. We should think of how individuals, how competition can help in the market solve those problems.
Correct.
With proper regulation.
I'm here.
No, there was somebody else who had a question before you.
This is
yes. And then the last question, really.
There's one gentleman over there. This has turned out to
are
be
you giving us dinner?
lively.
नमस्कार सर.
नमस्कार.
Yes.
मैं सुशील द्विवेदी हूँ, नोएडा में रहता हूँ सर.
जी.
मैं इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर सेक्टर से हूँ और एनसीआर के जितने भी शहर हैं उन सब में करीब करीब काम कर चुका हूँ. अभी एक सज्जन का सवाल आया था कि सुपर टेक वाले ने कर दिया, इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर की कंपनी जो जेल में डाल दिया। लेकिन अब स्थिति सुधरी है, जैसे आपने बताया कि रेरा में वहाँ से आपको रिफंड मिल गया। दूसरी स्थिति आई कि आम्रपाली के कम से कम 10,000 फ्लैट, 10,000 से 15,000 फ्लैट तक जो थे वो डिलीवर हो रहे हैं बिकॉज ऑफ द इंटरवेंशन ऑफ द सुप्रीम कोर्ट। ऑल्सो यूनिटेक बिल्डर्स के सारे प्रॉब्लम्स सॉर्ट आउट हो गई हैं, उनका लेआउट पास हो गया है। इसी तरह से सुपरटेक ने भी अपना रेजोल्यूशन प्लान दिया है, वो भी शायद जल्दी होगा, आप घबराएं नहीं, ये एक सोल्यूशन ये आपको इन दिखाई पड़ेगा। मेरा सबसे बड़ा एक समझ में आता है कि अभी ब्रिजेस गिरने की बात समझ में आएगी, सबको सब टाइप का एक्सपीरियंस है। इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में ये कोई डाउट नहीं है कि बहुत ज़्यादा काम हो रहा है। आप एक्सप्रेस वे से कहीं चले जाइए, दिल्ली से आप निकलिए, आपको सब जगह मिलेगा, एयरपोर्ट मिलेंगे, ब्रिजेज मिलेंगे, फ्लाईओवर मिलेंगे, टनल्स मिलेंगे। कहीं ना कहीं थोड़ी मोड़ी दिक्कतें आती हैं, हो जाती हैं, लेकिन मैं जो फोर्सी करता हूँ कि ये अगले 10-15 साल में अगर इस इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में मेंटेनेंस नहीं की जाएगी, अगर घर की मेंटेनेंस नहीं की जाती है तो वो भी कोलैप्स हो जाता है। इसके लिए जो कैपिटल आगे आने वाले टाइम में या बजटरी प्रोविजंस करने होगी, या द लेवल ऑफ मेंटेनेंस इज रिक्वायर्ड टू बी डन, if the government takes care of these things, then only this will sustain and live its life.
Yeah. Good point. Good point.
Good. I
And
think
lastly, sir.
Fundamental to this.
Lastly, sir, I am thankful to IIC and its director for providing me an opportunity to hear you, because I have been seeing many advertisements of yours, lectures, where the participation fee was too high. And this is for the first time that I am listening to. I am grateful to the India Habitat Center.
Well done, Habitat Center and InfraVision Foundation. Excellent. Okay. So quick answer, sir, and then we.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, since we have a budget coming, I hope part of the capex is for the maintenance and not just new project. No, you're absolutely right.
That's a failure of infrastructure and being good.
Yeah.
Good infrastructure requires.
Yeah, right.
Shall we wrap here now? Thank you.
I just have one last
one more. Okay.
Yeah.
Last question. Absolute last question.
So my name is Rajaji Meshram, sir, and I would take the liberty of asking you a personal question. Sir, from what I see is that you took an early retirement when you were 50 from the CEO position of Procter & Gamble. And I'm very curious to know that, from a profession in which you must have been in the center of a boardroom controlling so many people, to an author, which mostly is you and your paper and your pen. Was that a difficult transition, and how did that happen? I'm very curious to know that.
Okay, this is time for a commercial message. Read my memoir, which is called Another Sort of Freedom. And it actually describes the story. And in fact, Habitat is doing a conversation on that on August 7th at 7 p.m. So
you got the answer.
Free,
Okay.
free publicity.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gurucharan, for a fascinating discussion, and to InfraKatha with Habitat Center, and of course the InfraVision Foundation. Thank you all. Thank you for being such a good audience.